What's up, Guardians? Alright, I'm going to take us through some of my favorite maps that I've made and just do a rundown of like some of the what I'm going to call style tips for making maps that, so far everybody's been kind of just doing maps on um, or videos on sort of the mechanics of the map maker. I'm going to try and do something to help teach sort of ways of making stuff hopefully look good. I'm not sure if I'm the right person to teach that, but I'll give it my best. So this was my very first map, and looking at it from the map editor side is a little bit like looking at it from tactical view, but you can kind of gauge, just what it takes to put into a map and ultimately see it from a different perspective. Um, Again, I'm doing Big Game Hunters because it was my very first map, and it didn't look like this the very first time I published it. I've come back and done second pass, third pass. I didn't know what I was doing, so it didn't lay out as perfectly, when I first set it up. And I had help from other map makers that came in and sort of gave me tips and tricks on how to make things look better. And the assets, released. I recently added all the trees because they give us new trees. And originally the walls, these cliff walls, I had just put flat rock, you know, rocks that I had flattened up, and now I know a little bit about how to do some of this stuff better. But um, first of all, uh, with this map, I basically just took a XL Zephyr, map, and I set up my seven uh, seven hills, and I I built ramps into them, and that was practically all I had done originally. And I thought, well, let's put something unique in the middle. So I built a bridge over the middle, and then I set up some rocks, just some oversized cliff assets from the Zephyr template. And then, because I was concerned about people just immediately taking the high ground and using that, I set this spawn blocker up on here once I learned about how that works. And because I didn't want the this space over here, these cliffs, to be spaces where people could spawn, mechs and stuff that would then just shell the hillsides, I put these non-walkable terrains on those. And I wanted to have multiple starting spawn locations the way you can do in a Conquer map. You can set the game mode to have additional possible starting points. Well, I wanted to have additional possible starting points, so I set up the map to have that. But because of a limitation with the way that you spawn in, you couldn't have spawn balls all over the map or at each of these points, because you could spawn in and at one point, but your spawn location, your warp gate possible starting point, right, would be on the at the other one, and so you'd still start over here, and there might be an enemy spawner that actually set up shop over there, and that wouldn't be ideal. So in order to get around that, I created this sort of ancient platform above, so all of the spawn points are up here, so it didn't matter which part of the map you spawned in on, you would always spawn up, or the warp gate would choose. You'd always spawn up here and then just run and jump off the top. And then I had to go and make no building up there because people were putting teleporters up there, and I decorated all that. I wrapped it in clouds. And then because people were just kind of doing little short hops off the side of that thing, I went and put invisible walls around it, and it just sort of expanded and expanded and expanded. Um, I put my little decals on the sides over here, and I used the painter to paint all this stuff. But effectively, it was a very basic map. to do conquer with. Now, I put all kinds of resource nodes with plenty of resources for the Overmind to consume so that there would be tons of sentinels everywhere. Some of you may have played my Sandstorm map. This is an idea I had where instead of having the standard health, all of the enemies that spawn in quite en masse have an incredible amount of health, enough that there's no way to just stand your ground and just fight against them. You are constantly running away in order to survive. And as a survival map, it's really, really entertaining, I think. I like a map that is super challenging, but this map did go through a long stint of being almost unbeatable in multiplayer, which was unfortunate. It got a bad rap for that. So you started off here in this little cave. This green box that you see on it is a occlusion volume. Occlusion volumes I haven't done a special video on yet, but basically you put a box up there, or a box around a set of assets, and then anybody outside of that occlusion box can't see any of the assets that are inside that box. So this cave exists, but as soon as you jump out of the cave, if you were to look back up there, you wouldn't be able to see the cave anymore. That can be really cool for a number of reasons, depending on how you want to use it in your design. But I think that the primary reason that it was designed was so that you could, add more assets to your map. But if they are in a place where they don't need to be seen yet, you could put this around them, and then the game wouldn't render them, so it would actually perform better on your headset. So you could set up different occlusion zones. It ends up working pretty well for other ways too, but I think that was the original idea. So making this map was pretty simple, right? It's just a square sand map. I took the basic sand, I didn't have to paint it almost at all. I gave it the procedural generated terrain, and then I just took the same, 8 or 12 rock assets and changed their sizes and shapes and everything, but then just placed them around on the map to kind of get this, not an obstacle course, just this area in which you can kind of run and gun, but mostly run from your start point over here over to point 2, right? And then over to point 3, and then finally to point 4, where hopefully eventually something comes in and rescues you. The thing I really want to point out is that, when you're down here on the map, all these oversized assets that you can see around the outside of the map, that's what I've put out there. It's not hard to do. You just set up some large assets, whatever you want to be outside of your map, and that decorates in a really nice visual way what your players will see, around that, because they also contain depth. As the player moves, that stuff's moving around them a lot better than just that procedural landscape that you can get. It's kind of meh. So, that's my Sandstorm map. So, I said that the reason that I was going to do this video is because I wanted to kind of give away my thoughts on what really makes a map look good. So these are just my thoughts, but looking at this, you might wonder why I've just thrown a cliff asset right out there, you know, in the middle of nowhere. Why I've got cliff assets out here, just out in the middle of nowhere, right? So the reason why that I've got these cliff assets out here in the middle of nowhere is because off of the side of the map, right, where this map ends, I've put in, you know, I decided to use the Mapmaker's landscape. And what's important is that, you know, the Mapmaker's landscape, the way that I've actually set that up, it actually runs, the landscape runs up right up to the edge of the map here. And then it runs, it's a hillside. So if I place that map asset there, I figured out that that cliff asset looks like it's inside the landscape, you know, of the editor. Same is true, you know, over here. The way that I've loaded these assets out here, they actually look like they're sitting in the landscape. So instead of just having that blank open space over there, or the cliff walls that get loaded out up on either side, right? I'm going to load this, so bear with me a second. Preview. Okay, so now we've loaded in. This is the Mapmaker table. And this is the forest that I have on the one side, and these random assets that look like they're off on there. Here's those assets over here, and that cliff on that side. But now that we're in here, if we come over here to this same side, I'm going to move faster and just change my scale. Dramatically. So these assets that I said I put out there just as decoration on the outside of my map, right, show up that way through. And I pointed out that I put this one there because I wanted it to look like it was part of that mountainside. So really what you're doing is just, you know, building out your landscapes by taking the assets and setting them in such a way that they look like they're somewhat natural in the environment. And I'll use rocks to hide the edges of my, you know, play table, play space. Yeah, so tends to make a pretty cool looking map. At least that's the way I feel about it. This is definitely my favorite of all the maps I've made, for all its issues. And again, over on this side, I put those rocks that are just hanging out there in space on my editor table. I put those there because on the map, the way that I've set up this landscape, it fills out up to this, and that just looks pretty. That's the end. This is the edge of my map, right here, and that those just are out in space. But the way that it looks on the when the map is actually rendered, the environment's rendered, it looks like that. This map is a desert biome map, but I built a bunch of these, you know, sand, rock, mountain islands, copied them, and they are sort of these spiraling mountains upwards, but they all exist over you know, what would normally be a desert plain, but I put water across all of it, and then I put this kill mesh over top of the water. So if anybody does fall or land down into the water, then they die, and they'll respawn up on the up at the respawn balls. But this is a conquer map, and you know, there's all kinds of decorations down here in the water, but the vast majority of the game is being played through these, you know, red rock mountains. And the red rock mountains get their color, their distinct, you know, color, because in this map, and this is something that I think I may have talked about in a previous map or video. Maybe some other people have, but you can adjust lighting, and certain skyboxes have certain colors of lighting. This particular skybox is what I'm using here, right? And this skybox gives a blue lighting, which it puts this blue light on everything. So you've got a blue light on everything, and then the ambient intensity, which is normally 1.1, is currently dropped down to 0.35. So the lighting off of these is really low. I can show you sort of what that would normally look like if I hit it like that. So normally all of these objects are naturally appearing like this because they carry their own light. It looks like that. But if we put it back to 0.35, they look like this. The sun intensity, I've got at 4 because the blue light blasting at 4 looks really cool. Normally, the sun is just 1, and it just looks like that. Sun is important because it gives everything that it really makes everything's textures pop. And I say it's important, but by default, the sun is actually turned off. So your defaults look like this. So if you were to just look at this map the way that I initially built it, right, it would just look this way. But that's not what I was going for with my map. So I have it set differently. And you can do a lot of cool things like that. My sandstorm map uses the sand biome, or the sand skybox, which puts off this yellow light. I even have a map that uses the pink sunset sky with the pink light. But most of the skyboxes have a normal white light, or one of the other, you know, clearer white lights. Okay, so this one's not one of my popular maps, but it was a map that I did that I can talk a lot about. Some of my favorite techniques for making landscapes look cool. So I'm going to go through this. I learned some tips from other much better map makers that I tried to apply really a lot more in this map than I have in some. So this map I got to make using a tool that I don't know if it's ever going to be fully released to everybody, but it allowed me to use assets from different atmosphere or from different biomes, so that you'll see assets, you know, from Zephyr, from snow, from desert, and from space, all in the same map. But that meant that I could make, you know, all of these different things. So, you know, in this Zephyr asset, or in this Zephyr quadrant, I did put out, you know, the Zephyr plane or whatever, and then so something that I think it was, maybe it was Ard Akuma, or maybe it was Death by Guinness who first told me, but I've heard him say it many times, that the way you want to set up a map is really get your idea for your design, and lay out that sort of outline or whatever, your model, then once you've got it set up, then you layer on assets, um, which is really, decorating, right? So that's what I did. Is I made my four quarters map, and then I just decorated the four quarters. And some things that I did to decorate was add extra rocks, um, clouds in the sky, plants in the water, uh, little ferns all over the place, and yeah, and just up the rocks. I've got some space assets with some assets layered into that, various different points throughout the map. Um, One thing that I like is the way that the icebergs look in the water, so I put icebergs out in the water. Um, but again, the way that you decorate your surroundings, not just the actual play space, but the way you decorate the map outside of the play space is really going to be pretty immersive um, on a map. So even if the player never goes to those spaces, if they see it, that's the incidental stuff that looks good, right? It's good to take note of that, right? Because that'll make your maps look better. So don't just use trees to stand up. Also, take these dead trees and lay them down. Be careful about how you do that because they can block paths just as easily as you can set them up to be walk over. But having trees that are floating in the water, right, or whatever. So that's what I was doing there. Um, Again, layering assets through. You can use assets like I've used these wings. When I did that, I was doing it because I was covering up um, pieces of rock that were sticking through the wall that I didn't want to have to change all of my game model to account for. So I just, sometimes you use an asset to just cover up something else that didn't go right. But another reason why I wanted to talk about this map is because it's a map where I used invisible platforms. I've done this on a few maps now. The invisible platforms are a great way to allow um, flying, flying bugs to come from, above, uh, from areas that the player can't walk. Right, player can only walk on the platforms that they can land on and actually do stuff with. Players can't land on invisible platforms, but invisible platforms have nav mesh, so if you have bugs spawning on invisible platforms like this, I've got a bunch of dragons and flying bugs that spawn out on these platforms and then come flying into this higher invisible platform, and they can try to attack the players in this area too. So it's a survival map, so if the players all survive, then they get to leave in the end. But this is another area where I've just kind of layered these assets, some of them out of the way, to give this look of kind of a neat whatever aesthetic. Anyway, so to finish it all off, I'm going to bring it back to Big Game Hunters, where, let me say, although on the editor table you can't really see it, sometimes what you really want to add, what you really want to might add, is a little bit of fog. So on this map, I've got fog set at 0.01, which is actually a lot of fog. On Sandstorm, I also do a lot of fog. Sandstorm, because of the different skyboxes having different light, you can actually get different fog as well. The fog in Sandstorm is actually a yellow fog, so it looks like sand, you know, in the air on the super dark skyboxes, the fog is actually a black, and it obscures the mist in front of you. I'm gonna head out into the map here to demonstrate this fog. If you know are looking for it, you can put this kind of fog in it. So Big Game Hunters is set up with this kind of super thick fog. If you use that dark fog that I was talking about, actually, I'll just show you. It looks like, you know, darkness, night around you, but particularly in the style of light not being able to penetrate. So if we go to, say, a 0.5, you know, it looks like there's just an area lighting around me, which, you know, that can be a neat effect that you could use in a map as well. So yeah, if you have ideas for additional videos you'd like me to make, or just maps that you'd like to see, uh, shoot them down there in the comments. Thanks for listening. Good luck out there.